When you can't
It's
sell it, you can't sell a business if you're that wrapped up into the day to day. I mean, if all the client relationships are with you, or if the majority of the work being done is being done by you, who's going to buy it? When you're starting anything, that should be part of your plan. Is what happens when things fall apart. He goes, so because if you don't close immediately, you're going to be facing $10,000 a day fines and some other crap. I unloaded him. This guy's the assistant attorney general, right, for the state of Minnesota. This is not just some random attorney. And I unloaded on him.
Hey there, Empire Builders. It's Tommy, and I'm back with another interview. Please welcome to the show, Aaron Bakken. How you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Tommy.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for being on the show. So this is one of the easiest shows you'll ever do. We always ask the same 5 questions of everybody. Question number 1 is, tell us about your current business and your current job role in that business.
Sure. So I've been in and out of franchising as a franchise owner for about 25 years, and I currently own 2. One has turned out to be kind of a disaster, and I'll use that as a juxtaposition for the other one that's turned out to be really great. I am currently an owner with Spray Foam Genie, which is a spray foam installation franchise, part of Phoenix Franchise Brands. And there's been a big push in the world of franchising for more and more kind of absentee ownership models. And where effectively the franchisor takes on the majority of the responsibility of day-to-day operations in exchange for a higher fee. And this company said all the right things, but did none of the actual work that was necessary to truly set up the systems for passive ownership. But they convinced about 90% of their owners to do it. And it's been really to call it a bait and switch would kind of be an understatement.
Sure.
But it's an important piece because I also work as a franchise consultant and broker. It's an important lesson for everybody in this idea of doing due diligence, really truly reading through the franchise disclosure document, checking to see what kind of lawsuits, if any, have been filed against these people in the past. And before you do anything else, validating with as many people as you can that are currently in the system how well things are going, even if it's different brands owned by the same company. Generally speaking, what I've learned over the years of doing this is that when something's rotten, it's rotten everywhere, not just in one place. And so since this was a newer brand, it was selling like crazy. I had clients that were buying into it, and I kind of figured it, jump in the bandwagon because I had sold a business. But so the key lesson there is simply, you got to do your due diligence. You got to make sure you're really doing a market study to make sure that there's actually an opportunity for it in your market, background details on the people involved, the executives, and validation. The second business, which is one we'll talk about more here today, is a company called Eagle One. They were a service provider to me for many years for the trampoline parks that I used to own. Oh. And, in that kind of a business, our biggest issue is managing the volume of incoming calls and demand for help for booking parties, booking jump time. And in a business like that, you're mostly employing teenagers who, barely know how to speak to people on the phone, let alone ring up a client that's, standing in front of them. So we struggled finding the right service provider. And eventually I came across this company, Eagle One, based in Cincinnati, that has a 100% domestic team of support people that does everything from inbound and outbound sales call center support, outbound lead generation work for B2B companies, all kinds of digital marketing and social media presence management and reputation management. And then they have a very unique, frankly, one-of-a-kind direct mail, AI-enhanced direct mail product. And so about 4 years into my relationship with them, they had been trying to grow their business as a B2B services company using the traditional account executive in a different city here and there approach. And we're finding that basically they were just paying out big salaries and expense accounts for people who didn't perform. And so in conversation with me and a couple other people, they started pursuing this idea of franchising and eventually asked me if I would join their board of directors. And so I've been helping advise them as they've grown that franchise. And I've liked the business so much, not only as a client, but beginning to really delve into all the different things that they do and how they really can change the customer experience environment for companies, both B2C and B2B, that I decided to become a franchisee. And so now I'm basically out there helping and finding companies that are struggling with their growth, not able to really manage the incoming call demand, whether it's for support or an order that has been placed, or for instructions on how to handle something or how to make a reservation, or just asking questions about the business of the service. Um, it's been a game changer, and especially because our team is 100% domestic. We're a military family-owned company. Over 25% of the people that work in the business are the spouses of active duty military, which for those folks who kind of know, when you're the spouse of an active duty military person, you're moving around constantly, which makes it very hard to maintain employment. And so a good chunk of that team is remote. And the day after they move to a new location with their spouse or the new base, they can be up and working. And so we've got this really great team of dedicated people all here in the United States that are basically helping change the way that companies interact with their customers without these companies having to add and do all kinds of work internally. It's again, really about customer experience improvement. And that's what Eagle One does.
Wow. So you're on the board of Eagle One. You're also a franchisee of Eagle One as well, too. And
Yes.
then you're still a franchisee of the installation business.
Correct. And I work as a franchise consultant and broker as well.
And as a broker, yeah. So just as a side note, my company is a operations management platform, and we actually have a bunch of trampoline parks. So just out of curiosity, how many trampoline parks did you have?
2. And I was part of the Sky Zone group.
Oh, yeah. We know those guys. They're out here in Colorado. Yep. Cool. Yeah. They use us to do the daily walk around, checklist and all that stuff. So just curious.
Yes. Yeah, we had something like that. I don't remember who we used, but yes, I remember having something like that.
Nice. So let's talk about, so because like, as I mentioned to you in the pre-conversation, I used to work at Quiznos, and I actually ran their franchise assistance program back in the day in 2008 when they were kind of imploding. And so I really do want to touch on, for just a couple of minutes, dive a little bit deeper into the due diligence part of things, because as people I've heard on this show before, for sure, is, you have to remember that the franchise salesperson is just like a car salesman. Their job is to move a franchise. Their job is to move a car. And you have to, and they're going to present to you, they're going to give you the right guy to talk to. They're going to give you, like anybody, like people always ask us for our business, and I'm sure you've seen this too. Hey, send over some references. Well, nobody in the world is sending over a reference that was bad, right? Like when people ask for references, you send them the best people in the world. So that's what franchise salespeople do. They tell you, they get you to the one franchisee or the couple franchisees that are crushing it, or they're getting a lot of help from corporate so that they can dress up the package. You know what I mean? So like, I just dive a little bit deeper into like what you would have done. Like, how would you have done some of that due diligence you spoke about? Let's just dive in a little bit about that, I guess.
Well, I did this as much as I could with that spray foam business and Spray Foam Genie, but it was new. And so there was not a lot of validation that could be done. They had other brands, and the mistake that I made was not doing validation with people that owned in the other brands. Because again, as I've learned in hindsight, the passive investor program that they created has never worked for anybody, really. A very, very small number of successful franchisees in that system, and it's a tiny number. So the typical process for validation that I will walk myself and anybody else that I'm helping look at franchising through, first and foremost, is a market assessment, a market study. Now, you can do that yourself by doing a Google search and just finding out who's out there, calling those companies and getting a sense for how do they answer the phone? Do they answer the phone? Send in an email inquiry to the website and see if you get a response. If you do, have them come out and give you an estimate if it's that kind of a business, or go and visit the business and find out how much do they suck at what they do or how good are they, and take notes. Put in the time and effort to actually truly understand what the competitive landscape is going to be. You can also hire someone. I have somebody that I've worked with for years who does that kind of work for pretty nominal fee to save me the time. And she's very blunt. She's like, oh yeah, this is not going to work in this market. Don't do it, kind of thing. Or this looks like a great opportunity, and she'll give you the reasons why. So market assessment study is critical. 2, you got to make sure when you're looking at this business, you need to read through that franchise disclosure document. It's going to be the most boring thing on the planet you'll probably ever read, unless you're an attorney and you're used to this kind of stuff. But there are critical sections like the item 7, which is, it breaks out the startup cost piece. For example, a piece, I'll be honest, that I wish I had given more credit to is that in the spray foam installation FTD, it only provided 3 months of operating capital. Now, when I spoke with their salesperson, he suggested a higher level of operating capital, which I had, and it still wasn't even remotely close to enough, and I'm still not even profitable in that business. But make sure that, if it's only showing 3 months, you should probably come in with at least 6 months of operating capital, right? It's not even 9, because the biggest thing that I've found that causes people to fail when you start a business, whether it's a franchise or not, is being undercapitalized, not having enough money to make them, to go the distance to get this thing to profitability. The third piece then is
I want to add one point to that. Everything takes longer than you think it's going to take. So if somebody's telling you 3 months, it's going to take 6 or 9 months before you even get to that point. And it's just the human brain can't wrap itself around. And the other thing too is the best time to get money for a new business is before the business is open, or if it's skyrocketing out of control and you just can't grow fast enough, right? Which that doesn't happen to most people. But once you start the business and you're not having good, let's say, you're burning through your capital and you're not getting those sales and no one's going to lend to you. So it's almost easier to get money, a promise of future sales. But once you start to show an actual financial track record, it's not great. No one's going to give you any money.
Well, yeah, Tommy, frankly, that's one of the things to me that's really quite broken about the way in which the SBA and small business finance works is that you can come to a bank getting ready to buy a franchise with 0 revenue and not having doors open for the business, whether there's physical doors or not. But yet you can get an SBA loan for millions of dollars to start that company. The minute you launch that business and you open your doors, you can't get jack squat for 2 years. And you need to be showing effectively profitability at the end of those 2 years to be able to get a business loan or an SBA loan or a line of credit. So you're in this no man's land of basically terrible finance for those first 2 years, where you're probably getting, credit card stacking or some sort of line of credit that comes to 10 or 15% cost, meaning you borrow $100,000 and you're starting with a balance of $15,000 just in the fee to the broker that basically helped you close that deal. So that's why being properly capitalized in the beginning, if the FDD shows that you need $250,000 to get that business open, get a loan for $400,000. The worst thing that can happen is that you pay it back faster because you don't need the money. But having enough money is absolutely critical, and you can't go back to the feeding trough, so to speak, once you start. The third piece, validation. So we talked about that. You're right. I mean, the franchisor, generally speaking, is going to try and connect you with their happiest franchisees. The FDD, I don't remember which section it is. I want to say it's maybe section 20 or 21. It lists because all the franchise disclosure documents effectively follow the same federal structure. There's a list of existing and closed and or transferred locations. Go through that list and call them. And usually the name of the owner is in that list as well. Sometimes it's their personal contact details. Sometimes it's just the location contact details, but call and validate. That's what I tell as a franchise consultant. I tell all my clients, call the people they tell you to call and then call 5 or 6 more and take notes, because not all of them are going to be happy. I mean, in every franchise system is probably at least 10% of people who are screwing things up in some way, shape, or form, or you picked a bad location or whatever. But take notes on that, because then compare those notes with the franchise or sales representative and find out, why is Tommy in Colorado, why is he suffering, whereas so-and-so in San Diego is kicking ass? What's the difference between these two? And they're probably going to tell you, well, Tommy, we've told him he needs to spend at least $2,500 a month on marketing, and he's spending $1,000 a month. We told him that he's really not probably the right person to be doing sales, but he's refused to hire and budget for a salesperson. Those are the kind of reasons that sometimes relate to why somebody's not successful. So again, there's always a deeper answer, but validation is absolutely critical. To me, it's the most important part of the entire process of buying a franchise. Call as many of those franchisees as you have time for, or you can connect with. And then the last piece is, you're going to eventually be invited out for a discovery day, and the salesperson is going to literally go away once you sign your deal. So whether you like the salesperson or not, you shouldn't base your decision on whether or not the salesperson sucks or is awesome. It should be about the people that you meet at that discovery day who are going to be in charge of supporting you in charge of doing your marketing or marketing support, operations support, training, all that kind of stuff. And if you get any kind of weird vibe or weird sense from these people, especially the executive folks, that this is too slick, that they're just trying to push the sale, trust your gut. Don't do it. I've owned 13 companies over the last 25 years, and half of those are franchises. And most of the time, the vibe has been good, and the vibe was really good with the spray foam business. But I'll tell you, I also just have learned that they're a very slick organization all the way through, and I can't for the life of me understand why they wouldn't put more effort into making the business successful versus just not being honest. But here we are.
Yeah. And that's a bummer, because the thing everyone has to remember too, and I know I always sound like a broken horse, but at the end of the day, like, this is your business. You're the name on the lease. You're the name on the SBA loan. You're the person that went out and told your friends and family, hey, I'm going to go make this dream happen. And you have everything to lose, right? Like the franchisor, they want to sell franchises, but at the end of the day, if you go out of business and they stay in business, you're the one that's suffering. So yes, just to tag on to everything that Aaron said, this is your business. And the other thing too is you got to have that positive relationship with the franchisor, where you have to have that positive mental state, I should say, really. That's like, hey, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make this work. Like, if these guys are in my way, I'm going to get them out of my way. Because at the end of the day, once again, it's your debt. It's your bankruptcy. So you just got to back it out.
And you bring up something that's really important, and that is, it's still a business. And every business I have ever been involved in, regardless if it's a franchise or non-franchise, is hard. I mean, most of us are the worst boss ever, because we expect more from ourselves than we would ever expect from anybody else, right? We'll demand that we work late hours, we'll work all weekend, we'll basically take time away from family because we're so dedicated or concerned about the business failing. And so you just have to realize that you got to go into this business, one, prepared to do the hard work, but two, they're providing you with a game plan, and it only works if you actually follow it.
Yeah.
What I'm amazed by is that in every franchise system that I've encountered, there's a small subset of people who think that they actually know more than the franchisor. Now, in some tiny circumstances, that may actually be true. But in most cases, why did you buy the franchise then? If you didn't want to follow the plan, you should have just gone out and started your own thing.
Exactly. Like, you don't buy a franchise. Like, I don't buy like a Taco Bell to like work on my own gordita recipe at home and sell my own Tommy gordita. I buy a Taco Bell because they've got a proven model that I'm going to just execute. You're buying a franchise to be a business runner, not a business creator. Now, I do want to, you mentioned something earlier, which I hadn't even really heard of, but I want to kind of explore it a little bit more. And this might be more of your consultant hat, which is this idea of these sort of passive income franchises. I've never heard of that before. And I'm curious, like, give me some examples. I'm just curious. And are any of them really working well? Because I'm curious to hear about that.
Well, so as a trampoline park owner, I lived 4 hours away from my business. It was a multi-million-dollar investment. With that particular business, it isn't a passive investor option in the beginning. You need to be very involved. There's quite a few that you can get into where over time, as you build your team, you absolutely can step out of day-to-day operations. But that's, starting something from scratch where you're automatically going to be more of a passive investor. So there's a couple of examples. The brokerage I'm part of, we're the exclusive representative for a new electronic vehicle charging station franchise, backed by the largest, I think it's the largest installer of these types of facilities in the United States, called Bay Electric. And then the SK Group out of South Korea, which is a company that has a market capitalization that's close to the size of Apple. Probably the single biggest player in manufacturing for electric vehicle technology in terms of charging type stuff and batteries and all that. And so these two companies are working together, and they've created a franchise because there's going to be something like 30 million electric vehicles on the road by 2030. And right now there's 198,000 charging stations in the United States. So, an incredible servicing of charging spaces. And Tesla has done a terrible job of keeping their charging stations up and running. They're routinely broken and all this kind of stuff. And so this is an opportunity where once it's set up, which is just the initial construction and permitting piece, it literally is go and check on it once a week. It's almost like a vending business to make sure that no one has stolen the cables out of it or hasn't vandalized it. But basically, that is truly going to be more of a passive investor business, but it's not cheap. It's going to require people that have a decent amount of money to blanket their market with these charging stations. There's another group that I've worked with called Resi Brands, and they have that one, Painter, um, uh, Pink's window cleaning, and a third business I think is like a garage floor surface coatings business. And they offer an option where you still have to be involved, but they're really going to be working kind of hand in hand with you during that first year or so, really showing you the ropes on how to run and start the business, how to hire appropriately. So it's passive in some way in that they're really in there working with you. But the idea is that once it's done, you can step away because you've got a team that's in place. And I've got a fourth brand or third brand, which what out of count I'm on here, called Kiddo Kinetics. And Kiddo Kinetics is like it's introducing children to sports and sports in a non-competitive way, teaching kids how to play soccer, how to do basketball, golf, whatever it is, out in public areas. And because they typically, it's not like a brick and mortar business. And if you want, they'll run the business for you in year one, same general premise. You're basically working alongside them with them doing the heavy lifting, and they're showing you how to actually run and market the business so that by the time that when your contract's over, you're in a position where
it's gone.
It's kind of running itself. So
that makes okay. Thank you for clarifying that, because I was kind of thinking like what would be completely passive income. Going back to that car charging thing, just as a side note, like I don't own an electric car, but I rented one in Phoenix like 2-3 weeks ago for a soccer tournament. And I enjoyed it. It was fun to drive. I was like, okay, I'm doing something different. Everything was great till Saturday night. I needed to go charge the car. And I got that EV Go app. And the closest charging station, I'm down to the 20% charge. The closest charging station's 7 miles away. I get there. There's 3 chargers. Like you said, the middle one's not working at all. And then on the one that I needed to go on, only one side was working. There are 2 cars there. I literally sat in this parking lot in kind of a lower end part of town for 2 hours roughly, trying to get on the car, get on the charger, then having to wait for it to charge up. It was horrible. I'd never run another electric car again. I can totally get it if you own one at home and you have a charger in your garage. It makes complete sense.
Yep. This is the ongoing problem. And I think the real premise behind this business is because that experience is universal for so many people who have either rented or own electric vehicles. And so, the premise behind that business is that you go to all these local hotels and you basically say, I'll basically pay to install them. You just give me 3 spots, and you do that times 10 or 15 locations in a city. And it's a little bit more of a capital intensive business to get started, but from a day-to-day operations perspective, I've never seen anything like it that is going to potentially be as simple as if you think of what vending machines are, you basically go once a week and you fill them up and collect your money if it's even collecting cash. This is all electronic, and all the technology, this is a very sophisticated process. And as a franchise, this company's really got their act together. I'm very pleased that we're the only people getting to show this, because to me it's a very unique opportunity. But it's people that have at least a $750,000 to $1 million net worth, and a couple $100,000 that they could potentially put into it of their own money.
Well, and the thing is too, what it sounds like? It sounds like the next generation of the self-service car wash, right? Or the laundry, the laundry facility. It's going to be a cash intensive business, but it's not going to be cash. It's just going to be a money generating business. And as there are going to be more and more electric cars. And I will say, just to wrap that part up, I was out there and I was waiting to get this car, and this very nice guy, because I had never done this, where I never charged a car. Very nice guy who was getting his car charged. He was kind of coordinating for people. He's like, oh, I think that literally 10 more minutes, whatever. But he was like, this is such a stupid technology, because he was frustrated. And the other thing is, you open up your map and you go find me the closest charging station. 9 times out of 10, it's in an apartment building behind a fence, or it's in a parking garage you can't get into, or it's at a hotel and they won't let you use it unless you're a guest. So there's a lot more charging stations out there. There's a lot of charging stations out there, but they're just not available to the guy who's out around town, So it was very frustrating. Yeah. Cool, man. Okay, so that was question number one. You can see that I run a tight ship here. Question number two is, and you can talk about whatever, you tell me what business you want to talk about, but sort of talk about when you first started one of your, I guess that probably makes the most sense for the installation. What were some of the initial challenges that you had when you started that installation business? Or it could be the other one, but the other one seems to be going so well, but you had challenges, I'm sure, on either one. So you pick.
Well, yeah, I can cover both of them quick. So with the spray foam insulation business, again, the fallacy was that we're going to do it all for you. They didn't. But, many months in, I've got the general manager of that business constantly calling me and asking me questions and asking me to do this and approve this. And, I need money for that. And I'm kind of thinking, okay, I didn't get trained to do this stuff. I thought I was going to be a passive investor. And so, the challenge there was simply not having been properly trained. And I kind of raised the alarm, but I guess I assumed that they were still going to do the right thing for many months. Sure. Until, when you start spending $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a month and you're not making any money, you start to then get a little pissed off. Yeah. And I got to that point, and really had to advocate for myself and for the business when 90% of the things they were supposed to do weren't getting done. But again, that's a very unique situation. I mean, it's one in which that's really a function of just an organization from the top down that isn't structured properly. They were, from what I can gather, they were designed to sell franchises. They weren't designed to run them at all. Sure. I'm not even sure that the people who run their own are doing all that well. So, but with the other business, Eagle One, the more B2B services piece, the biggest challenge with that business is learning how to actually talk about the services that they provide, understanding what cues to listen for from a potential prospect, actually getting the prospect on the phone or on a Zoom call so that you can actually have those conversations, and getting to a point where as they're saying things, you're going, that would be a good opportunity for this. Oh, this service would help you with that. And learning how to ask those probing questions. Because what I've learned in my now 30 years of selling is that you can't come into a call to sell. You need to come into a call to listen and ask the right questions to get to the bottom of what is somebody's issue or problem that needs resolution or where they need help. I mean, whether you're networking or whether you're actually selling or whatever it is you're doing in business, that's just a good skill to have, I find. But with that business, that was the hardest piece, was just understanding what to ask for. Because I've mostly been in B2C type of businesses most of my adult life. I mean, the last time I worked in a business-to-business services company was back in the 90s. And so, I was a little rusty. And so to me, it's the sales piece, because I don't care what kind of business you're in. If you can't, or if you don't have the ability to move the dial on sales, nothing else matters. You could have the coolest widget, you could have the best service, you could have the nicest looking restaurant, but if you don't have people coming in the door, it doesn't matter. Yeah. So that piece there is going to always slow you down if it's not your primary priority, in my opinion. If you're opening a brick and mortar business, let's call it a trampoline park. That's a 6 to 8 month build out. Well, you should be out there marketing that business from day one, getting people hyped and excited, offering memberships, advanced membership prices that are maybe discounted from what they will eventually be, things like that. If you're doing a B2B services company or a B2C services company, you're out there going to festivals and events. You're putting out yard signs, or you're doing door hangers, anything to get people to know that you're coming to town, that you're going to be available. To me, that's the most important part of getting started. You can't put all your time and effort into the build out and the planning and all that kind of stuff and then go, okay, I'm open. Oh crap, now I've got to go find customers. Because I mean, unless you're a transactional business where, you're selling ice cream or you're flipping a burger or whatever, I mean, that's a little bit different, right? You're still going to do some hype stuff in advance, but you gotta be organized, and you gotta have that at the forefront of your kind of mind with this business. Is what am I going to do to find customers and drive them into the business?
Yeah. And
does that answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. And the reality is like, once again, everything takes longer than you think. And so like when you're trying to start a company, like we have a tech company, but when you're starting a company, your first job is selling your business. And then your night job is actually getting your business open and ready to go. But you have to be having meetings, just even getting, like, as in sales, like, you have a meeting and then that person no calls, no shows to the meeting, or they send you an email 5 minutes before, hey, can we reschedule? I had an emergency. It's always an emergency, right? There's always an emergency. And then, then your sales process gets kicked out another week or two. And then it's another week or two. And then they got to pilot it, or they want to try it, or, whatever it is. And all of a sudden, you're putting in 3 to 6 months with this one person, and, and they might just be afraid to tell you no, or they'll lie to you or whatever. So it's just like, you got to be selling the whole time just to try to get to the 20% of the buy.
And I'm not getting paid to do this, but I want to put in a plug for, I grew up in the world of consultative selling.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't really work anymore. And there's an organization called Seventh Level, and they have this, they have this black book. The guy who's kind of created this has this kind of totally different approach to the sales process, and it's really tapping into the potential buyer's emotional needs. If they're an executive, it's what are the sales goals you have with the company? What's going to happen to you if you don't meet those sales goals? What is currently stopping you from reaching those sales goals? Like what kind of issues you're running into? How does it make you feel? I mean, that's going to suck, right? When you don't meet those goals, right? Yeah. But how would you feel if you came across a service that could solve all those problems for you? And then, when somebody says, oh yeah, it sounds great. Yeah, sure, I'd love that. And they say, well, I don't have the money. Well, but what if you did? If you did have the money, how would that affect your business? How would that help you grow? It's getting to the bottom of, again, the emotional reasons for why people buy. And it's been brilliant. I find it's the most advanced, but yet in many ways, common sense way. But I think it's something that if people haven't looked it up, Seventh Level Selling, I remember the name of the guy. I don't have his name off the top of my head. But anyway,
I've looked at his stuff before. It's all over Facebook. Online video course, right? Like it's that kind of a thing.
Well, there's certainly videos. They make the majority of the money on coaching, but it's something where you can just read the book and do it yourself. They've got a lot of free videos. Anyway, I don't need to spend a lot of time on it, but I find that it's really been changing how I talk to people and how I sell, and it really helps.
That's great. Okay, next question would be, what are some of the challenges you're dealing with right now?
Personal stuff is really impacting business stuff, and this is, I think, maybe this will be relevant to your listeners and the viewers, is that, life happens. And life isn't always fair. And things happen at times in a way that feels like you're just a snowball rolling downhill, getting bigger and bigger. So my dad died in January after a long illness, and that was tough because we're a close family. And watching somebody waste away really sucks. But that sapped a lot of energy out of me and my focus on the business. Simultaneously, the shit was really beginning to hit the fan with this spray foam insulation business, and it was becoming clear to me that this thing was a joke. And it was really freaking me out because it was a lot of money that was being spent. And simultaneously, I've got a 16-year-old boy who's been struggling with brain cancer for the last 3 years now. He had his first brain surgery 3 years ago, or I guess it was 2.5 years ago, at the beginning of summer break. Last year, at the beginning of his summer break, he had an aneurysm in the area near where his brain tumor had been, and if that thing had ruptured, he would have died. And so he had quick and very, serious surgery for that. And we were hoping that we would be in the clear. And in June, he missed an MRI because he was told he wasn't supposed to eat, but he forgot, and he ate the morning of his MRI. And it turns out he already was having a hemorrhage on the recurrence of his brain tumor, and he had a stroke. And then had to have emergency surgery 2 days later to remove the tumor and to stop the brain bleed and all that kind of stuff. And so it's just been, imagine that, all of that. And then my wife has done her absolute best to try and keep it together. We've got 4 kids total, and she's having a very difficult time. All the business stuff for me has been complicated, and you add on all the family stuff, and there's no magical answer for my circumstance. But I guess the point to this particular story is that you have to give yourself some grace as a business owner. You have to recognize, one, you can't do it all, and two, there are going to be times in which your family stuff simply has to be a priority. So what does that mean? Your business just gets shortchanged? Well, no, you plan for it. That means, unless you're a solopreneur and it's always going to be that way and it's only going to always be you, even in that circumstance, have mechanisms in place to have some automation, whether you're using AI or you're using a lead generation group or organization, something that keeps the ball rolling forward. Or if you do have a few people in your team, make sure you've got somebody that's cross-trained to take on some of your responsibilities if you need to step out for a week or two.
Yeah.
Because that was my reality. I mean, that happened multiple times this year. And when you're in a sales type of role, it takes a lot of time to build back the momentum into your sales funnel, right? Especially if you've kind of been kicked in the head or kicked in between the legs, so to speak, as it felt like. With all these things happening, it takes a while to recover from that. And so having a backup plan, having services that are available to you that can pick up the slack, or having an employee you can lean on, if you have to, offer them a little extra money during that time period, whatever it takes. But you got to anticipate this is going to happen. And so, I didn't necessarily have that in place because I didn't think that there would be the tri or quadfecta of terrible things happening in a single year. But here we are.
Well, it's interesting because I lost my mom to Alzheimer's, and it was like an 8-year ordeal, from sort of start to finish. And that coincided with having very young kids and me owning a company, my wife owning a company. So we're sort of in a similar boat. And and one of the things that I always try to impart upon people too is, just like you said, like, you don't actually own a business if you can't go on vacation, if you can't go to the doctor, if you can't deal with these kinds of things. You don't have a business. You just have a cult of personality, right? If you're so command and control that nothing can happen at your business unless you're in there, like going, wash those dishes, make that steak, whatever. If that's how you've built your business, then you don't own that business. That business owns you, and you just have
Correct.
a job at that point.
Yeah,
right?
it's the general premise. Yeah, it's the general premise of working in the business versus working on the business. I mean, the vast majority of franchise systems out there, for example, will tell you and have set up a system where you're supposed to be working on it.
Yeah.
They'll be able to tell you at what time you should be hiring certain people, so you can get to a point where, okay, maybe you need to be in it every single day for the first 3 months. It's probably prudent anyway when you're starting a company. But the idea is to quickly get yourself to a situation where you're working on it, where it's going to be open and running whether you're there or not.
Yeah, because it's
Right?
just impossible. It's impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you can't sell it, you can't sell a business if you're that wrapped up into the day to day. I mean, if all the client relationships are with you, or if the majority of the work being done is being done by you, who's going to buy it?
Yeah. No.
Because the minute you go away, those clients are gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, totally. Yeah. So that's a huge lesson, because I think so many people, they also, it's a comfort level thing too, right? Like, I used to I worked in a lot of restaurants, and a lot of times they'll make a waiter the next new manager. It's a huge jump in it's a different role, different responsibilities. And those people always default back to just helping wait tables versus actually managing the business, right? Because that's where they feel comfortable. And a lot of people who buy these businesses, they're not business people. Like, they're executors, right? So they really shouldn't even really own that business potentially. They should work for somebody else and just be the best manager ever and make a ton of money that way. But yeah, it's tough. And this life stuff, it creeps up on you at the worst possible times. And it always seems to come in threes too.
Yes. Yes, it does. Which again, when you're starting anything, that should be part of your plan is what happens when things fall apart? What happens when my spouse is in the hospital, or when my kids get sick, or my spouse loses his or her job? What does that mean? What does it look like? You can't necessarily have an answer to every single one of those scenarios, but you at least should have some basic contingency plans on what do I do when there's an emergency. If you can't take, like you said, if you can't take a vacation, if you can't get away, what's the point?
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you make all this money and you can't ever or you feel like you have to literally shut your doors because you're not going to be there. What are you doing? You're going to lose 2 weeks of revenues and go to the beach? Like, come on, man. Like, get your act together. Yeah. Okay, so we've hit all my dang questions. Wrap up with a war story question. And that war story is just like, one of those crazy things you can't believe you got through. And it can be from any of your business. It doesn't have to be from your current ones. Just like, oh my gosh, something horrible happened or something crazy happened, or, whatever it is. If you got one of those, we'd love to hear it.
Sure, it's a pandemic story. So as I mentioned earlier, I used to own a trampoline park up in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and that was one of the states that had a lot of mandated closures for certain types of businesses, and we were categorized as a gym initially, like a fitness center, and so we had to be closed from I think it was like January, February until June, and then we were allowed to open at like 20% of capacity. And I think that was lightly bumped up later in the summer or early fall. But then when the second COVID surge came, the state of Minnesota and the legislature passed some new restrictions. But as a business owner at that point, was I paying attention to what the legislature was doing and saying? No, right? And more importantly, I mean, I had a 28,000 square foot lease. I mean, my rent was $24,000 a month, and my landlord was a publicly traded entity. And I think that one of the bigger mistakes that both the federal government and the states made with a lot of the COVID money handouts, as well as the lockdown stuff, is it was really a giant transfer of money, mostly to big business, if you ask me, because in my circumstance, my landlord knew I was getting money from the federal government. And I wasn't eligible for state money because I technically lived in Wisconsin and owned a business in Minnesota. So Minnesota had this mandate that you could only get Minnesota funds for COVID relief if you actually lived in and were a resident in Texas and Minnesota. So it's a double screw. But the worst part is that the legislature came through, and I had paid basically all the money that I had been given from the government went straight to my landlord, a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded REIT, our real estate investment trust. It was stupid. And so I warned them. I said, if I get shut down again, I'm out of money. I'm not making any money. And as of December 2020, I think it was 2020, or it was 21. I don't remember which year it was. If I'm not open again, I can't pay the rent. We're gonna have to come to some sort of deal, because they basically told me to pack sand every time I'd ask them for any kind of a break on rent. And so the legislature passes this new mandate. I assume, like everybody, because there's only 8 trampoline parks in the entire state, that I'm still a gym, and I open up because what was in the news is that gyms are allowed to open up again. Yay. So I open up and I get a phone call the next day. Actually, it was in the evening. And it's, hello, this is blah, blah. I'm the assistant attorney general of the state of Minnesota. And I understand that you have reopened against the current mandate. Your business is not allowed to open. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, oh, well, the legislature changed your classification. I mean, remember, there's 8 businesses like mine in the entire state. You've been now put into the same category as like a limousine and a bus for parties or whatever. And you are not allowed to be open for business. And I'm like, he goes, so, because if you don't close immediately, you're going to be facing $10,000 a day fines and some other crap. I unloaded that. This guy's the assistant attorney general, right, for the state of Minnesota. This is not just some random attorney. And I unloaded on him. And I said, this is the absolute horseshit, that here you guys are making me as a small business owner close my doors, but you haven't told my multi-billion-dollar landlord that they can't continue to collect rent and suck me dry and basically make me go bankrupt because of your mandates. I said, this is absolutely insane. And I had been hearing this across the country from my fellow owners, because we were all having the similar problems for the most part. And he's like, oh, he goes, that makes sense. You're right. He goes, unfortunately, I don't write the laws. I just simply have to enforce them. He said, but I'll tell you what, I happen to be the person that all of the consumer complaints for the entire state of Minnesota come to my desk, to my team. He goes, write me a complaint, name the landlord, and I will basically write them a nastygram. He said, I can't force them to do anything, but I'll write them a nastygram that looks very official and tell them that they need to work something out with you. And hopefully that will help.
That's actually really cool.
It was really cool. And I did that. And he wrote a very, very official looking nastygram and sent it to them. And within 48 hours, I was getting a phone call from their new attorney in the state of Minnesota and wanted to work out a deal. And it saved my business. Because I would have been bankrupt by January at that point. And it wasn't a deal. I mean, they basically just abated my rent until a later time period, but it allowed me to float until I could officially truly reopen again.
Wow. That's actually heartwarming to hear that somebody in government actually was like, well, had a creative because he could have just been like, yeah, that's not my problem. I don't make the laws. She talked to you. You should vote better, right? Like he could have just done that. And,
Yeah.
by the way, I don't live in Minnesota, but the 50 employees that work in my trampoline park, they all do. And
Well, that's what I said.
Taxes and everything, So like, come on. Wow, that's a really great story. That actually like is heartwarming because, like I said, the guy had a creative solution. Here's what I can do for you.
Well, and it really, and he made it very clear. I can't enforce them. I can't make them do something. But he said, I have learned in the past that when you get a letter from my office, it typically yields action. So
that's awesome. Wow. Well, that's great. Aaron, do you want to plug anything? Do you want to give out a website name or like for any of your businesses to let people know where they can reach out to you if they want to maybe get brokerage help or learn more about the other?
Yeah. So if there's people out there that are curious about franchising, I mean, again, I've been doing this for 25 years, or they have a business and they would like to turn it into a franchise. I've got a very unique set of services with my brokerage group as well as my background that I can help people like that. Just go to aaronbakken.com, AARONBAKKEN.com. And there's a lot of data and information there about the work that I do as a broker and consultant. For Eagle One, which is, again, the B2B services organization that helps companies with managing their customer experience needs and improving outcomes with their customers. I mean, frankly, you can reach out to me through the aaronbakken.com website or email me at aaron.bakken at eagle1, EAGLEONEFC, frankcharlie.com. So aaron.bakken at eagle1fc.com. My number is 608-576-4592. People are welcome to call or text as well.
Well, Aaron, thank you so much for being on the show. Our prayers are with your son and hope that he pulls through all this. And thank you guys so much for being listeners here on the Empire Builders podcast. And we'll get you some more interviews soon. Take care, everybody. Bye, Aaron.
Thanks, Tommy.